It's me. It's okay. I was just.
I can introduce.
Oh, sure. Oh, please feel free. Please feel free. Yeah, terrific. Thanks a lot.
Hello everyone. Thanks for joining us like in the last session of the research series. And I think it's fair to say that we saved like one of the best for the last, like interact.
Right.
Very happy to introduce my dear friend and colleague Janet Jock. She is a PhD candidate in public affairs in the O'Neill School. She majors in policy analysis, and her research is broadly studying the impact of social programs on health and education outcomes in low and middle income countries. And also use this opportunity to congratulate her that she's graduating this summer, and she just got a job in the political science department at Auburn University. So she will be presenting one of her, the newest update in her latest research project.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. I think we'll stand. Something that I'm strange. Okay, so before I get started on this particular topic and this particular paper, I just wanted to do a really quick. Okay. Little bit of background about myself and why I choose these topics and why I study in the places that I study. This particular paper takes place in a Nicaraguan setting. I was a Peace Corps volunteer for 2 years in a very rural setting of Nicaragua. So I lived there for a little over 2 years. I also was a Peace Corps volunteer in Colombia for a year, and I do a lot of research in South Africa in rural low income settings as well. So this is a reason for my interest in sort of low and middle income countries. And when I was in Nicaragua and also when I was in South Africa, particularly in Nicaragua, I had a lot of people tell me that school food programs incentivize them to send their kids to school. I've had people tell me that the only place that their child got a high meal was at school. So it really got me thinking about the power that social programs have to incentivize school attendance, to incentivize parents to send their children to school who are really dependent on agriculture and may depend on their children to work on the farms. And also maybe incentivize even the child to want to go to school because that's where they're going to get meals. So today I'm presenting a paper on the impact of nonprofit school food programs on school absenteeism. So school food programs have been shown to improve schooling outcomes and increase school attendance. These programs have been widely studied. They've been shown to improve test scores, improve school attendance, improve both mental health and physical health outcomes. So these have been widely studied. In many places, nonprofit organizations and public organizations implement these programs. So nonprofit organizations implementing school food programs is quite common globally. And in many places, you have both types of organizations implementing these programs. However, I was thinking about sort of these two different types of organizations implementing the programs, and I was wondering if there's sort of a difference between the organizational types in terms of their effectiveness at having good outcomes for the beneficiaries of the programs. Just a little preview, this study finds that nonprofit school food programs are more effective at decreasing school absenteeism than government school food programs. But I ultimately conclude in my discussion that more research is needed to understand the mechanisms driving differential outcomes by service provider type. So I'm going to present some empirical analysis and quantitative analysis to start off with, but a big limitation of that empirical analysis is that I don't have enough information in my data set to really understand the reasons for this, which is why this was the Ostrom workshop and the course and everything was the perfect opportunity for me in my, I had already done the empirical analysis to really think about how I can use the institutional analysis and development framework as a tool to methodologically dissect the unique challenges faced by organizations within public and nonprofit institutions. Oh, I meant to say this at the beginning, that I'm super grateful to the Ostrom workshop for this opportunity and to be a part of this amazing group of scholars that Forgot that.
That's all
But
good.
anyways, this came at a perfect time because the course really got me thinking about how I can use this. I haven't done field work yet, but I plan to do field work, and I wanted to sort of use this as a basis to develop a survey and sort of dissect what's really going on there. So I'm really excited to present this and hopefully get your feedback at this early nation stage of the process as far as, how I could go about my survey and my research work. So a little bit of background on school food programs. As I've mentioned, they've been widely studied. They've been shown to improve schooling outcomes, break cycles of poverty, and have positive later life outcomes for children. In a lot of these places, school is not only just a place where they can get a good academic background so they can get a good job later. It's also a place where they learn social skills. They learn developmental skills. In some places, children don't have a good safe space at home, and schools where they have a good safe space and they have adults sort of taking care of them and giving them support. The impacts of school meals as well have been shown to especially positively impact children from low socioeconomic status backgrounds. So this is just sort of a few examples just to show you how widespread these programs are. If you're not familiar, most countries have some form of school food programs. Sometimes they're universal. In rare cases, they're universal. Oftentimes they're means tested or targeted at specific populations in low, middle, and high income countries. So these are just some examples from Nigeria. Kenya has a school food. This is a study about the Kenya school food meals disrupting generational poverty, improving community outcomes. Early exposure to universal free meals improves school attendance. And even here in the US, this is a study on universal free lunch in New York City that found that it was linked to better test scores. So the positive impact stream across low, middle, and high income countries as well. In turn, governments have been sort of increasing these programs and increasing the span of these programs, particularly during COVID-19. A lot of governments expanded these programs. The federal government had a lot of grants to increase access to free school meals for children. So these are just a few examples. North Carolina, Kenya just launched one of the biggest school food programs in Africa, serving lunches to nearly 4 million people. And I know Canada is in the process of trying to implement a universal school meal program as well. So governments recognize that these programs are important. At the same time, the programs are expensive, and the governments are sort of faced with a situation of, we know that programs are important, but how do we pay for these programs? How do we cover the demand and the need of the children, particularly who can't afford to buy school lunch, that they can get a meal at school. So these are just a few articles from the States. Universal free school lunches will end after cuts to pandemic era spending. Schools are swamped by unpaid lunch debt. Congress got rid of free lunch for all programs, so meaning some students are going hungry. So at the same time, governments are sort of contracting on these programs due to how expensive they are and complicated to implement. And this is from 2022 in Indiana. Federal child nutrition waivers ended in June. So this is a local problem as well. So this is where nonprofit organizations can serve as a complement to these government services. Nonprofit mobilized to replace lost school meals across Tampa Bay. These are just sort of a few examples that I found, but nonprofit organizations are quite predominant in lots of countries and globally, also providing these school food programs. And these are some examples from Nicaragua and East Africa as well. So school food programs are sort of a nice place where nonprofits can fill a void in a place where maybe governments, particularly governments who don't have the infrastructure to provide these meals to everyone who needs them, to sort of serve as a complement to governments in these programs. So back to my research question, both of these types of organizations are providing these programs, oftentimes within the same country or region. are nonprofit school food programs as effective as government programs, or is there something are there differential outcomes by service provider type? And particularly I'm looking at school absenteeism for the reasons I mentioned earlier. Not school food programs can be a reason why parents send their children to school. So that's why I'm particularly looking at absenteeism here. A little background on sort of why it's important to study absenteeism. School absenteeism is a critical global issue that particularly affects children from low-income countries. Among disadvantaged students, school achievement rapidly declines with increasing absenteeism. So a lot of these studies show that absenteeism has stronger negative effects on children who come from low socioeconomic households. The impacts of school attendance on cognitive development, as well as physical and mental health, is well documented. This is pretty intuitive why it would be. And chronic absenteeism leads to other health and life course problems such as economic hardship, delinquency, mental health disorders. So studies show that children who are absent more in kindergarten and primary school tend to be more chronically absent in high school to later life course problems. So looking at absenteeism and particularly chronic absenteeism for these high-risk children is sort of important. If we can find ways to implement strategies to decrease absenteeism, then we can maybe hopefully avoid these later life course issues. So my research question. So quick background on why we might. So when I started thinking about this, because of some of the nonprofit courses I took and some of the things I was studying, and just my time living in Nicaragua, I sort of had a hypothesis that the nonprofits might be more effective than governments at implementing the programs. So that was sort of the hypothesis I was testing with the knowledge that, I could potentially find the opposite. But why might I expect nonprofits to be more effective than governments? In the 1980s, there was an ideological movement away from the state during the liberalization and the privatization movement. So during this time, a lot of low-income countries were experiencing strong economic hardship, reaching out to sort of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank to try and get loans to sort of get themselves back on their feet. And during that time, these Western donors, including the IMF and the World Bank, they really pushed towards privatization as a condition for these structural adjustment programs. So as a condition to get loans. The reason for that is that they said that the public sector was too inflated in these places. The governments in these places in the public sector were not suited to efficiently provide programs. And they thought that the private sector, including private organizations and nonprofits, were more appropriate to implement effective programs. Donor agencies, program to NGOs, and social welfare programs, thinking with the belief that the private sector was more effective at achieving economic growth and providing services. Studies also have shown nonprofits to have a cost advantage over governments. They rely on volunteers and things like that. A lot of times they could pay lower wages and potentially have lower transaction costs than governments. There's less sort of red tape to go through, less different levels and branches of government to go through in order to adopt policies and actually pass bills and pass policies to be able to implement programs. Studies have shown them to be more transparent with and connected to communities, as well as more adaptable and innovative than government organizations as well. Although both nonprofit and government organizations often implement services alongside each other, studies rarely compare outcomes across public and nonprofit provided programs. So this was another reason and source for sort of my interest in this. This is a systematic study of nonprofit organizations and sort of research on nonprofits. And one of the findings was that there hasn't been a lot of sort of trying to compare outcomes between service provider types. So my study takes place in Nicaragua. The study setting is Madrid and Matagalpa in this northern part of the country. It's a low income setting, high levels of food insecurity here, and agriculturally dependent and subsistent, most of the individuals in the study setting. My data comes from the Nicaragua Red de Protección Social, which is a government conditional cash transfer program. It was targeted explicitly at households in extreme poverty. They selected 42 municipalities. And within this data set, there were 1,398 primary school children who received a school food program. It was sort of collected as a variable in the data set, but it wasn't really looked at in terms of outcomes. And of this, 953 of those received a school food program from a nonprofit organization, and 445 received one from a government organization. My independent variable here is whether the child received a school food program implemented by a nonprofit organization, with the reference group being that they received a school food program implemented by a governmental organization. My dependent variable is the number of school absences in the last month for that child recorded at the time of data collection. I fit a zero inflated Poisson model to look at the relationship between these variables. The reason is because the school absences variable had a high number of zeros, which is a positive thing. So the zero inflated Poisson was sort of the most appropriate to correct for a dependent variable with a high level of zeros. I also controlled for the distance the child lived from the school, the household size, the parent's highest level of education, whether or not the parent paid for a school uniform or a monthly recurrent enrollment fee to attend school, and whether or not the household received the RPS conditional cash transfer.
Could I ask a question on clarification?
Yeah.
What is this conditional cash transfer? When do they receive it? Does it cover these fees? Or that wasn't clear in your paper?
Yeah, so the conditional cash transfer was not, it was, oh, that's a good point. Let's talk more about that. So it was, they received it once every 2 months, and it was conditional on, it was conditional on whether or not they, so there was 2 different conditions. There was a nutrition aspect of this, so it was sort of conditional on the children having certain, they would like weigh the children and do sort of so there's a nutritional aspect of that, and then there was a school attendance aspect of that. So it was conditional on whether or not they attended school, I think, once every 5, they couldn't have more than 5 absences in the last month. I have another paper that compares the impacts of the CCT and the school food program and the additive impacts of that. This one I sort of wanted to just look at the school food program, but that's why I control for the conditional cash transfer in this paper.
So it has nothing to do with the fees about paying for the uniform or the monthly enrollment?
No.
Okay. Thanks.
Yep. Okay, so this is just a balance table of some demographic characteristics that I used as controls between recipients of the nonprofit school food program and the government school food program. The purpose of this is to see if there were large differences in these demographic characteristics that might otherwise impact school attendance. Luckily, for the purposes of this study, I didn't find that there was a big difference between the groups in terms of the distance the child lived from the school, the parent's highest level of education, and the household size. So these are my 4 models. One was run without controls, and then I sort of added demographic characteristics and school level characteristics and the conditional cash transfer just to see if my results remained consistent across. So I found that the nonprofit school food program was associated with less school absences than the government school food program in the absence of controls. When I added socio-demographic characteristics, I found the results remained consistent. And when I added school level characteristics, the magnitude grew a little bit, but again, the results were negative and consistent. And they remained consistent when I added the conditional cash transfer control as well. So in summary, I found that the school food programs implemented by the nonprofit organizations were associated with less school absenteeism compared with the government-run programs. The relationship was significant in all 4 models and remained consistent when controlling for demographic, school level characteristics, and the presence of the conditional cash transfer. The implications of this is incorporating more nonprofits into school food programs may reduce the burden for governments, which, you know, as you remember from the beginning of the presentation, governments are particularly in resource scarce countries. It can be hard to implement these programs and pay for them. Nonprofit organizations can fill and complement that role there. And they may even improve outcomes. Understanding the mechanisms driving differential results can aid governments and nonprofits to design more effective school food programs that incentivize attendance and improve health and educational impacts for recipients, which gets me to sort of the second part of the presentation, and the place where I'm also hoping to get feedback and support. Yeah.
Can I quickly ask, so the different programs, did they take place at different schools? I didn't understand.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, but that couldn't be a important context variable.
The specific school.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if one type of school is better than another,
Yeah.
maybe that.
Or they have other incentives which we don't know, perhaps.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I don't
Only for-
necessarily have information on the quality of the school in order to really get at that. But the selection criteria of, I mean, this area is pretty homogeneous in terms of sort of the income level of the households and sort of the schools. But I don't have that sort of that context data to really, 100% say that for sure. But the purpose of sort of that, the selection criteria for the RPS program was to sort of select individuals who are comparable. But that is a good point, certainly.
And it could be that the schools are more open or more active if they are open to work with an NGO.
Yeah,
That is perhaps
Yep.
something what you.
yep,
Because there must be something that they decided to work with an NGO or to take the governmental program. perhaps.
yes.
And that could be something in the whole philosophy of the school or what they. But sorry, I don't want to, we can discuss it later.
yeah.
It was more for clarification that I understand that.
That's a good point, and that's something obviously that I have also thought about, which is why I think it's important to, get in there and do field work about this. Because of the whole government failure theory, or the nonprofits in there because the governmental school system wasn't doing a good job for whatever reason. So that's definitely important contextual information. Yeah. Okay. So this was my sort of attempt to apply the IAD framework to public and nonprofit service provision. So I frame this part of the paper as sort of, there's something inherently sort of different about public organizations and nonprofit organizations in terms of how they provide services that may be driving results. So this is my attempt at sort of just think through what might be different about these organizations, the types of actors involved, and how they work, and the environments under which they work, and why that might impact sort of outcomes for recipients and the effectiveness of programs. And using this framework to hopefully sort of drive my survey questions and drive my field work. I started by identifying the different actors between these two different organizations. So in the nonprofit world, you have donors, board members, obviously you have local community members, you have both employees and volunteers. The local government may be involved in sort of working with these nonprofits as well. And then you have other organizations providing same or similar services. So in the nonprofit world, there can be, competitive between different types of nonprofit organizations. If the demand is high, they could have to compete for resources. A lot of times the bigger, more established nonprofit organizations are the ones that continually get the big grants. So it leads the smaller nonprofits to sort of struggle a bit to try and get these resources. So there's definitely sort of resource competition going on in the nonprofit world. And then you have maybe local donors, you have maybe foreign donors sort of involved in this as well, and board members sort of trying to make decisions and coordinate across themselves as far as, how to provide the service and then in the public sphere, you have a different funding scheme because you have taxpayers, voters, and citizens that are involved in here. So because the funding comes from taxpayer money, the public organizations sort of have to, number one, prove that these services are worthwhile in general, because some people might not agree with certain services that are even being provided, or especially when it comes to social welfare programs. There's this belief about the deserving poor and who should get services and who shouldn't and why. And then you have sort of another layer of belief as to whether the government should be providing the services. So maybe some citizens, taxpayers, voters might think this is a good service, but we shouldn't have to pay for that. A nonprofit organization should pay for that, or maybe a private organization. So then you have sort of this different sphere where these public organizations also have to cater to voters and cater to the people who are paying for the programs. You also have sort of government workers in different levels and branches of government. So you have all these different sort of complicated schemes coordinating across federal, state, and local branches, coming to an agreement about adopting programs, how much money, where to get the funding. This is sort of just the tip of the iceberg. There's probably a lot more that I could pull from what's different about the actors in these organizations, but this is because of my first shot at this. Then you have the motivations of these actors. So the motivations of donors being to give charitable funds to help a targeted population to meet the needs identified by the programs. The purpose of the board members to adopt sound, ethical, and legal governance of financial management policies, ensure that nonprofit has adequate resources. And then you have the local community members, where the amount of service delivered depends on the needs and community beliefs and values about the service. So this is sort of another layer, whether or not the community members demand the service and whether or not they think that it's a morally or it's an appropriate service. I mean, I'm just thinking of something like Planned Parenthood, for example. Some communities don't think that Planned Parenthood should be doing things. Others think that they should. So there's these sort of different conflicting beliefs here. And for the most part, there are some nonprofits who do charge services for, charge fees for services, but a lot of nonprofits don't charge fees for their services. So then in these cases, the cost might not be a concern for these communities because they're not paying for it. The service is free. In the public sphere, you have the citizens, taxpayers, and voters. The amount of service desired depends on the needs and citizens' beliefs and values about the service itself and about whether or not the government should be providing the service and how much the service costs and how much providing this service takes away from providing another service that we really need. So sort of the different layer here is that the community members are either the recipients or citizens in this case also are likely concerned with minimizing the cost of these programs as well. And then you have governmental workers in these different levels and branches of government who are motivated to hopefully implement effective and efficient programs, minimize costs, satisfy citizen, and in turn voter needs. Identified some different types of action situations here. So in the nonprofit environment, there's a lot of fundraising that's going on. The agreement in terms of implementation strategies happens between board members, program directors. You have leaders and beneficiary community members who might be sort of involved in these decisions as well. Versus in the public sphere, like I mentioned, you have to have agreement between different levels and branches of government. If it's a national program, if it's a local program, maybe not. Determination of where to get the funding, how much money, and all of these sort of different kind of coordination between levels of government. This is my sort of shot at applying these different sort of action situations to both nonprofit and governmental organizations. I just pulled out sort of one of these to talk about because I didn't think I had time to go through all of them. But I wanted to talk about, because something struck me when I was reading Ostrom's work about the different kinds of rules involved in these environments. So she talks about how really understanding what's going on in these situations it's important to understand the informal rules, the behaviors and the norms between these organizations. And that's what got me thinking that there's maybe something different in the socialization processes and these informal rules and norms between nonprofit organizations and public organizations, sort of like a different culture going on that might also impact how the programs are implemented and in turn the outcomes. So for the nonprofits, we have the behavior and the norms of nonprofit leaders, of the volunteers as well. So in a lot of nonprofit organizations, you have volunteer work going on. So what kind of norms does that mean? What kind of values does that bring into these organizations? You have the societal view of the particular nonprofit and the service they're being provided, and just societal view of nonprofits in general. Some communities are, society may view nonprofits in general a little bit more favorably than the government in some cases. I feel like there tends to be a trend to criticize the government and what they're doing because we're paying for it versus nonprofits. Oh, they're doing a good thing. The behavior and the norms of beneficiaries of nonprofit services. Is there something different about the beneficiaries of nonprofit services? Is there something that is different about the nonprofit service beneficiaries from the public service beneficiaries? Is there sort of a different feeling that, okay, I'm a citizen, so I should be getting the service versus this is a nonprofit organization and they're giving me something? And, is there some kind of norm and different, feeling about the beneficiaries of these two organizations? And then the norms for the type of organization. So who get the grants and funding? Is there a difference between the cultural norms of and the behavior and informal norms of the really bigger nonprofits, more established nonprofits versus the smaller nonprofits and more grassroots nonprofits? So this is something that's sort of in my plan to try and really suss out and dissect and understand what are these informal practices that make the culture of nonprofits sort of different in some way. And then in terms of government action situations, you have there are some of these things that were similar between. That's why I'm not highlighting some of these boxes, because I also found similarities when I was sort of thinking about it. There are similarities between the two organizations in terms of having to compete for resources, all of these different things. But in terms of what I was sort of pulled as something different about government organizations and the culture is political feasibility. So number one, the need to acquiesce to the citizens and the voters. And number two, the need to sort of coordinate and actually adopt these policies and get these plans passed. That might be, different from the way sort of a nonprofit organizations makes decisions in terms of whether or not they can adopt. The society's view of the social program in general, as I've mentioned, and then the incentives and preferences of the public and beneficiaries for the government to provide this program, among the very sort of few things that I thought about. But I also think that there's a lot more there to dissect in terms of the government culture and socialization process in government organizations. And this is all I had for you today. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to sort of getting your feedback on how I can move forward here. So thank you so much.
Yeah, well, I mean, we can begin the questions, Gustavo.
Okay, super. This is fascinating. Well, I would say more than a paper. This is kind of a research agenda, I would say. So I have a couple of questions about the empirical part, and then maybe we can talk more about this second part. It's so you can distinguish between who is founding something and who is providing, no? So it was not clear to me in the empirical analysis, it's what kind of comparison are we talking about here? It's always government-founded programs, and in some cases, government agencies are directly in charge of running the show. And in some cases, they are giving grants to NGOs, and NGOs are implementing. That could be that essentially the effect that you are finding, it's about provision, but it's always a public sector founded program, okay? But if you're telling me, no, it's like what we are talking about here is like in one cases, the government was fully running the job. And in the other cases, like there were zero government grants. This is essentially only through private sector donations or whatever wealthy people donations. That is an exercise in which the effect should be understood as effect of provision plus funding altogether. And unpacking those cases could be very interesting. Second, do you have any idea on cost? Because essentially they could be more effective, but if every meal costs like 5 times to one, in one case corresponding to the other, the cost effectiveness of this extra reduction in absentees could be very different, no? And then also related to that is like, can you give me an idea of what is the magnitude of the effect that you are finding? And maybe kind of something overall for this line of thought is, can you talk a little bit more about exactly how different groups were assigned to treatment and control a little bit more? And I totally understand in 25 minutes, you don't have time to go over this, and you wanted to present also the IAD part. But if you can talk maybe 5 minutes more about this, I think it could clarify a lot of questions. Okay, and thank you very much. I really enjoyed this. This is super important stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, so that's a good point, and this is a limitation. So the treatment and control groups for the conditional cash transfer, the school food program was not part of the study, essentially. It was just sort of a question that was asked. So do you receive a school food program? Is the food program implemented by a nonprofit organization or a government? So I initially was just sort of looking at this data set for another reason, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. There's 2 different types of organizations. But the huge limitation is I don't have much more information about that. I have done some digging and interviewed and talked to people of sort of nonprofit school food programs and recipients of government school food programs there, just to do some initial thinking about, you know, how I might go in and keep digging into this. And I did find that sort of there were differences that when the nonprofit organization that I spoke with, they said that they had employees in the communities who are monitoring the programs every day. And then the government organization administrator that I spoke with said that they once a month look at the bodegas and look where the food is. So I already found some things, but I didn't do enough to really like suss out what's going on there. But the data set is limited in terms of the information. That's why I know that I need to continue and sort of digging in on here.
One suggestion about this, it's if there was a government program, in principle, all schools have access. So those ones that are reporting as NGO thing, what are they doing? They are kind of rejecting the government program, replacing it by this one, or they are adding on top, because maybe what you are finding is a good effect because they are running the government program, and on top of that, they are also running, they are having this NGO program. So essentially, they are receiving overall a better program.
Yeah, that's a good point. So when I spoke with the NGO, the kind of words they use is that we, support in places with the school food programs, and we implement school food programs, but they didn't actually, and I should have asked this, why they choose which places that they go or not. And then I know that some of the organizations I spoke with provide something extra to really food insecure regions when there's like a natural disaster. So there could be those things going on as well. Yeah, but these are important questions to ask.
Yeah, thanks. That's a good complication, and I agree with most of your comments on there. So let's get that out of the way here.
We got there.
It's a question, baby.
This is a topic I find very interesting because because at one point I was very interested in sort of studying the faith-based organization debate in the US as to whether welfare programs or schools or food programs like this in the United States, if they were implemented by nonprofit organizations that had a religious basis, is that different from one that's implemented by ones that have a secular basis? And the arguments had to do with, you know, the, I don't know, so like the religious volunteers were doing it for even less selfish reasons than the secular ones, or on the other side, they were doing it to try to, you know, take the opportunity of a school program or a prison program to sort of, you know, get new believers in there. So there was, you sort of could look at this very positively, that you had a nice spin to it. There was one analysis that hospices run by religious organizations were a little better in the terms of the service they provide than these hospices that are run by private corporations that maybe are just for the profit. And the more I looked into that, and there was a lot of literature going on about the time under the first Bush, second Bush administration, the junior guy. But you know, it was really tough to distinguish between religious and secular nonprofits, and often between just nonprofits and even sort of a hospital running it or something like that, or different. So I was pleased to hear that you're finding that there's a lot of similarities between these organizations in here. And what I think emerged from that literature that I was looking at was that the religious really didn't matter. It didn't really shape the incentives in a way to really make a consistent kind of difference. And here I think you've got a little different kind of question, because there's not the religious component to it. I mean, maybe if it's an add-on program, then that certainly would be a good explanation for it. But I think it's probably just a replacement sort of program for it. And here the things would be, you know, and the similarity here between these kinds of organizations, there's somebody providing the funding and then somebody receiving the benefits. So both of them have that sort of structure. In the nonprofit, it's pretty clear there are the donors and then the recipients. In the state-run program or government-run program, it's the taxpayers and then the recipients, which may be the taxpayers or maybe other sort of groups of taxpayers and stuff like that. So it's all about sort of the incentives for sort of getting the sort of money, and the state officials are going to have primary concern about, since this is not an ideological sort of supersize issue, I don't think, for the Nicaraguan government, for minimizing cost. Whereas for the nonprofits, you can get a little cynical the more you study these nonprofits, because their primary concern, frankly, is getting more donations. Okay, because without the donations, they don't exist.
And if they don't spend all the money,
If they don't spend all the money,
then the next
they
year,
get-
they might not get the next grant.
they get poorly rated, because there are organizations out there that rate these determining how much they spend money on programs versus that. And so they have to, so they're constantly competing against each other for the donors. And so I think the incentive in what you found sounds perfect to me. The nonprofits running a program like this is going to have an incentive to monitor it, make sure it's working, because they need those positive results to take back to their potential donors and back in the West. To say, look, this great program we're doing, give us more money and we'll do more of this. And that sort of helps that organization as a whole. Whereas the national government or the education facilities or the school officials themselves, this is an add-on to their regular job. And so, I mean, maybe if they're even, if they're running the food program, it's not, it's taking teachers away from their other sorts of jobs. So it sort of fits very well. So I think that if you look at it kind of in that way, you can begin to tease out some of the differences. And it's sort of on that basic framework of where the money's coming from. It's a follow the money kind of thing. I'm getting more cynical in my old age. But it's a follow the money, and the money goes through donors and the nonprofits, and the money always goes through the state and the taxpayers and the citizen sort of relationship in that. And so there may be a reason to think that the nonprofits would be better situated here
And
on
then
that
a
basis.
lot of, these places are, sort of this low income setting, they're not able to, governments aren't able to collect so much taxpayer money.
Or they don't care to deliver services in the first place because they can't extract taxes. Yeah, it'd be different if it was an urban area or something like that. That would be a different set of incentives for the state officials. So I don't know, it might be comparison with a rural, with an urban area in Nicaragua might be a useful sort of comparison to make.
Yeah,
Because the nonprofits should have the same incentives, but the state officials would have very different incentives in an urban rather than a rural area.
that's a good point.
So anyway, I'll have some other comments for you later, but I just wanted to sort of lay out that I think you're really getting onto an interesting way to compare these programs, and they really are kind of development and aid programs that can really make a difference, incredible difference. And there's not a lot of those.
Mhm.
And so it's worth studying and knowing how we can make them better. So, good job.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's really an interesting idea also to compare that, and thank you very much for all your insights. I would like to add a little bit to Mike, because I thought also that follow the money, but also what is the real motivation? I mean, you laid out a little bit the motivation, but I think what is really the motivation? Is it about providing food, or is that indirect to reduce? Also, I could imagine that NGOs have the goal to reduce school absenteeism. I don't know. It's a difficult word.
Weird word.
Yeah. I wonder whether they have that also as an perhaps indirect goal or even a direct goal. Because I mean, that is, I think, something what is very well connected, providing food and that, and I think if they have that, perhaps you can find something also in their mission, or what is the goal of this program really? And it could be that they couple it in a way, like you have to be at 8 in the morning at the school and then you get your meal at 12 or whatever. I don't know. I have no idea how they work. But it could be that they couple it in a way, and that would explain also a little bit and perhaps the government has really the goal to feed the kids.
Mhm.
That is another idea. And then perhaps that is really the focal action situation, perhaps, which impacts most the outcome.
The focal action being where the motivation comes from.
Yeah, the combined with the money,
Mhm.
I think there is if we think again, sorry, in a network of actions too, I think, okay, we can think about what action situation is, where's the money coming from, and that then impacts also the motivation.
Yeah.
And that could be very different if you make that network for the government situation and then with the NGOs, and then perhaps you can really see the root causes. But then you need to have more information, I think. That's why all these questions which
No, that's a good.
Gustavo raised, and all these a little bit more contextual factors.
It would be interesting to see if it's in the mission statement. I like that, because my inclination initially is that these programs are implemented because this is a food insecure region, to make sure that they have lunch at school and they can concentrate. But it's interesting idea to look at the mission statement and see if they also are considering attendance and, as part of the mission. Thank you.
Because usually NGOs have more broader missions.
Yeah.
And then,
Exactly.
and I would really go also into the general mission of the NGO. And
Yeah.
then you can also look deeper into this program mission, but also because usually because they get the funding, the money from donors who support the whole mission of the NGO, usually not for specific programs.
Yeah.
And if they have these broader, like, okay, increase school system in this region or whatever.
Thank
If they have a positive result, positive program they can point to, that gets new donations.
Yes, and then they are more successful.
More
with a
successful
higher
doing their
success
mission.
rate, and then that is
There's some good in there somewhere, yeah.
the mechanisms. And sometimes you see really the success rate when you open the website of an NGO, they have a success rate of 90%.
Mhm.
And we also have to follow there.
Thank you.
I also had some general comments, like
Yeah,
big
yeah.
picture in back, in the context comments. I was thinking about how interesting it would be to have like an institutional ethnography of these NGOs and nonprofits. Not that you have to do that, but to understand a little bit more how they work. And I was thinking about this because of all the literature on NGOization in Latin America, how this apparent vacuum that they're filling up is being produced. And I think this is particularly interesting when you're thinking about agricultural communities that are food insecure. So they're not food insecure, they have been made food insecure. And the process of how they got there is a very interesting and very important one. And well, it is connected to many, many things, the history of Central America and specifically on that region in the border with Honduras and all of the things that go from Hurricane Mitch to structural adjustment programs and all of those things. But it would be very interesting to think with those big questions in the background.
Thank you.
Let's see, just a couple of questions. I'm curious, are these schools year round? Are they like seasonal? And the reason I ask that is because, I mean, oftentimes when the school lunch programs, like, are they discontinued over the summer? I apologize for my ugly American knowledge of Nicaraguan schools. And so that in combination with, are they private versus public? And I think there might be some interesting issues at hand there. I'm
Yeah, so they're year-round schools and they're public institutions, so all of the schools are public schools. Which is sort of an interesting thing to unpack because there's nonprofit organizations giving school food programs in some public schools and not, which is why it's important to sort of think about why. Yeah.
Cause one of your variables in the analysis was like the fee for the school. And is that the fee to attend the school?
Yeah, it said that, so there's a monthly enrollment fee in some of the schools.
Okay, so that's why, I guess that's
They
why I
are
came up with the
public
question,
schools.
private versus public, so to me, that would equate
Yeah.
to private.
Yeah,
The public schools don't have to be free.
No, I mean, until the recent tax levy, we had.
That is wild.
technology, but-
that's why I had that in there because they're public schools and some of them have a fee and some of them have to have the uniform and pay for the uniform. And that's why I included that because
Yeah,
that will have an effect on attendance. And I think it was associated with like lower attendance. for-
totally was, yeah, and that's what I was curious about, like how they're viewed, like in sort of a governance fashion. My last thing is, and obviously you can't go back in time, but at least my experience here is like absenteeism isn't looked at the same as it was before COVID, as past COVID. It's like after we missed a year and a half of school, nobody really cares as much. I mean, we still get the letter at my house saying our kids have missed too much. But I'm curious about like how that happened in Nicaragua, like did school shut down and now is absenteeism, did it take on a different meaning now than it did, March 2020? I don't know. And that would be more of an ethnography to try to unpack that from an administrative perspective. I don't know, I love this work. It's obviously incredibly important and it just gave me questions that.
Thank you. I can't tell if you're raising your hand or.
I have it. So I think this is something that I don't know enough about, but since I do a bunch of stuff with nonprofits and then nutrition happens in schools and stuff, it's just a personal thing of mine. There are spots in this paper, I'm just gonna point them out to you. There are a couple spots in this paper where I think you make presumptions that are almost conclusory, and I think if you and I think me not noticing that might be a place where you need to unpack something. I'll
Okay.
give you one example. Moreover, school absenteeism can lead to other health associated economic problems such as economic hardship, crime, illegal drugs, and mental health. I'd flip that sentence. I'd say economic hardship, crime, illegal drug use, mental health disorders, absence of the ability to pay for fees and school uniforms leads to school
Yeah, yeah,
absenteeism.
yeah.
And so and I don't know which is true.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering if that needs to be teased out better, because I think this is a much more complex issue.
Yeah.
And that's not good or bad. It's just what you decided to jump into. And unless you jump into that, I think you're gonna come to an overly simplistic, connected conclusion that actually you're not gonna be happy with either.
Mhm.
And you cite some really, outstanding stuff here. I'm wondering if they've teased it out better for you as well.
Mhm.
The big reason I'm pointing that out is because when you start then throwing nonprofits into the mix, they themselves often suffer from economic hardship, lack of mission statement. How many times do nonprofits just rally around a cause and then 3 years later, they're like, well, what the hell? We did that. Now what are we gonna do?
Yeah.
And that's not good or bad, but you've got like 3 different incredibly complex concepts smooshed in here.
Yeah.
And that's why I think some people are telling you, to detangle this some.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of when I hear you talk, while you also at times are pausing and thinking, oh, I'm not sure, I don't know.
Hmm.
And that's not good or bad. I think it's fine.
Yeah.
So it's a perfect spot to be. It's that moment where it's like, oh crud, this is harder. This is a little more complicated. That's a great place to be as a student, because it's
Mhm.
exactly where, in my opinion, you should be. But I do think you need to pull some of this
Unpack.
out, some and detangle it a bit.
Yep. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And just a really minor one, I love like you said, research agenda, right? So looking ahead at next and future papers, unpacking a bit more about the difference and kind of regime effectiveness of government, nonprofit, but also you might think about other interesting middle ground governance structures like benefit corporations. Those are
Yeah.
cropping up more and more, and I'm just kind of wondering whether it's in the specific context of, food delivery, or nutritional programs, or more broadly, like how do those fit? How do those rank or compare, right? Because there's a lot of organizations
Yeah.
reincorporating as these. Is that a good thing? Bad thing empirically? No idea. But it's new enough that there might not have been much work yet, and that could be kind of an interesting avenue to pursue too.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, to add another layer to this, I want to look into public-private partnerships as well.
Right, exactly.
That's like a
I
whole.
love P3, right. Yeah.
We have one time for one last. And.
It's already.
Sorry. That's it.
It's very quick. I only want to add to you and to you. Your comment perhaps first. I think, I would be really very careful also with the assumptions. Also, it depends very much on the country.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
perhaps in Germany and Switzerland, this is the opposite. There's a movement that they say school increases all these problems and they take the kids out of school and do homeschooling because of these reasons. So you have to be really careful with all of these assumptions and target it to specific countries perhaps. And then also which kind of government and so on. So I think this is one comment. And then to you, I would like to add also, I think, at the end, the NGOs in that case fight a little bit against the symptoms. And it's really a symptom. I mean, it's not the root cause. There are other root causes. And I think to understand why they fight only, let's say, against the symptom and not fight a little bit more, or perhaps this is connected with some other work, what they do. And I think that would give you also a little bit more background and understanding why they do that, and perhaps why that is more effective than the other way around. So, in that direction.
Thank you.
Any concluding?
No, just thank you so much. This is exactly what I needed. Like, so many ideas from this, all of your comments and conversation, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
You're super.
Jen Brass.
If it could help to connect you to a few people as well. I mean, is there anything else that we could do to help connect? I mean, you're taking on a problem that is so important, but so multidisciplinary. If through the process, you're thinking, wow, I'd just like to talk to someone who's next. Don't forget to give us a heads up, because oftentimes we have an amazing network and this is really cool stuff.
Even after you've gone to Auburn, we'll still be around.
Thank you.
Connect you with-
Now, right?
announcement there, we are having an event on May 6th with two big scholars of Central America. Mark Edelman and Andres Leon are gonna be discussing their recent books. So maybe that is of interesting if you are interested in Central America. So it's May 6th, 6 p.m. We're doing it is an Ostrom Workshop event, but we're doing it at the Red Bud bookstore.
Oh, fun.
Right?
Never even heard of the Red.
My tongue.
I gotta go.
There's a bookstore.
I also wanted to thank, just really quick, Megan, for all of her work on the research series over the course of the year. So thank you. Terrific, yeah. And yeah, thank you, everybody. It's been another wonderful year. Good luck finishing up. Good luck grading. Congrats again, Janet. That's.